So not too long ago, I made a video talking about how we have an upcoming recession, and it was confirmed despite the White House trying to change the definition for political reasons. But now the situation is just getting much worse, and we're headed into a financial crisis. Now, I'm going to talk about why we're headed into a financial crisis and not just like a recession. Although a recession is bad, a financial crisis is much worse. And once I go over that, I'm going to mention some factors leading to that, such as inflation, interest rates, unemployment, the fact that our elected officials are inept, the Chinese property market / their economy in general, Russian sanctions, and how to best prepare. So let's get into it. So why are we headed into a financial crisis and not just a regular recession? Well, we're already in a recession, if you're in the United States, I mean. We're not formally in one here in Australia as of yet. From what I've seen, there's hope that there's GDP growth in the economy for our next upcoming GDP report, but we're going to have one sooner or later, especially since Australia's economy tends to lag a little bit behind what happens in the States. So a recession is formally 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. And currently it's a significant decline in economic activity spread across the market, lasting more than a few months, normally visible in real GDP, real income, employment, industrial production, and wholesale retail sales. So regardless of what the actual definition is, the economy is weak. The output is low if you look at all the measures that indicate manufacturing output and even service production. Now, unemployment is only low because people have taken 2 to 3 jobs if you look at the detailed reasons as to what goes into the unemployment reports. And you shouldn't need 2 to 3 jobs just to get by. You should only need 1 to survive. 2 to 3 is for all the hustlers out there, but the problem is having a second or third job is becoming mandatory at this point. So a financial crisis is a situation where the value of assets drop rapidly and is often triggered by a panic or a run on the banks. And what a run on the banks is everyone taking out their money from a bank at a time. Banks use fractional lending, so they don't have all of the money required since they've loaned out a certain percentage of your deposited money. So if you put $1,000 into a bank, they actually loan out, let's say $500 of that money to grow their wealth. So if you ask for that $1,000 back, they don't actually have that $1,000, they've only got $500. Now obviously they've got a large pool of money, but if everyone who has deposits at the bank went to go to the bank to try and take out their money, the banks wouldn't have enough because a lot of that money is loaned out to other creditors. Now, a drop in asset values is a lot more important than you think. And these assets include housing and the stock market. So if house prices crash, people stop paying their mortgage, and there's words for this such as forsaken or abandoned. Now, why would you continue to repay your $600,000 loan if the value of your house has crashed to $450,000 and every other house around you is worth that much as well? Just leave the loan and get a new one for a cheaper house, just like what happened in the 2008 global financial crisis. Now, if the stock market crashes, it affects many pension funds, which is in itself its own massive problem. Now, the reason I'm not going to delve into absolutely everything here is because if I do, this video is going to be just way too long, even for my standards, so I'm going to try and keep it short and sweet. But basically, if the stock market crashes, a lot of pension funds crash along with them. Now, big banks need to be bailed out if they fail, otherwise they bring the world down with them. But unfortunately, this time the government doesn't really have that option. The interest rates are already far too low, so the governments can't really lower them much more, and the governments already have way too much debt. Now, obviously, if house prices crash and people don't pay back their mortgages, this really impacts the big banks. But if you've seen any 2008 global financial crisis video, you'll know how that works. So if you need that info, go and search that up. But I'm not going to talk about it here because, again, we're trying to keep this a little bit shorter than normal for my standard, which will still probably be like 40 minutes. So inflation, the cost of living is draining discretionary spending, which is the money you have left over after your essential spending. If inflation goes, quote, down to 2 to 3%, which it won't, the governments will leave the economy be. However, that doesn't reduce the price increases incurred from the massive inflation we had prior. For example, if petrol goes up from $1.50 to $2.20 per litre during rampant inflation, and then after that rampant increase, petrol goes up from $2.20 to $2.25, the governments will consider this inflation as under control. Now, the price of petrol is still way up from where it was once beforehand, but it just isn't increasing at a much higher rate. But it's still high. So let's say you're going for a drive, you go from 0 kilometers to 60 kilometers. So that's a pretty big increase. But then you go from 60 kilometers to 65 kilometers. Yeah, you're not increasing your speed as much as you once were, but you're still going a little bit faster. But you're still going a lot faster than 0 kilometers. So going from 60 kilometers to 65 kilometers doesn't mean you've slowed down. The rate at which you're going faster has slowed down, but you're not going down, but you're not slowing down, you're still going faster, which is the same concept as this inflation. Just because it starts to slow down doesn't mean it's actually going down. The money supply in the economy is still currently quite high, so inflation won't be anything under 4% for quite a while yet. So I'm not going to spend too much time on inflation, as I know that most people already know what it is. However, what most people don't know is how much longer it's going to be a problem for. If you want any more info on this, go check out some of the work by Steve Hanke. Basically, inflation's going to be hovering around 6% for quite some time yet. At least the inflation that's being reported. But again, go check out his info if you want more details, but if you just want the baseline level, inflation's going to be a problem for quite a while yet. Now, interest rates, they're still quite low across most countries. They're supposed to raise them above inflation rates to combat inflation, but they may not be able to do this due to all the debt in the system. Let's go through a few of the central banks and see what their predicament is. So the Federal Reserve, the Fed, which is the central bank for the United States, they can't raise them too much since it'll damage asset markets too badly, and they don't want to do this. And I also mentioned before that if asset markets are pretty damaged, it has its own set of problems. So I believe that the Fed is trying to somewhat combat inflation, but they're not really super committed to it. They're not going to pull a Paul Volcker, which I'll mention him later in the video. The ECB, the European Central Bank, they can't raise them too much since they cover 19 countries with different fiscal policies, and each government has differing debt levels, especially Italy and Germany. So if they raise rates too high, they might be fine in France, let's say, but they're really going to hinder Italy and Germany, for example. That's just an example. France has got pretty high debt too, as far as I'm aware. But the point is, they're covering 19 different countries at once, whereas most other central banks only cover one. So they've only got one set of fiscal policies to worry about. Now, the BOE, Bank of England, they've got a 9.4% inflation rate at the moment, and their interest rate is only at 1.75%. And then the UK economy is in its own shambles, which I'll go into now. So here are just some Instagram/Twitter posts I made on this concept not too long ago. Read through them if you want, but basically the UK economy relies heavily on imports, and with their high inflation rate devaluing their dollar, this makes their imports more expensive, which means they have to spend more to get stuff in, and that causes its own set of problems. Here's also just some more information that just spells the doom and gloom for the United Kingdom economy. So again, read through if you want. Employment. Now, low unemployment figures are misleading. You'll find that most companies are laying off staff, which if you've turned on the news or even looked around your local area, I'm sure you would have noticed this too. I will mention here in Australia, there's quite a labour shortage at the moment, but this is definitely not going to last for too much longer. but that's another topic entirely. I am going to touch on Australia later in this video. It's not actually scripted, but I may mention it if I feel it's relevant. So unemployment figures, they don't actually include those who aren't in the labour force, which means there are a lot of people without jobs who aren't included in these figures. They may have left the employee life to start a business/side hustle, but good luck making money in those in this economy. Not saying you can't, but if workplaces are laying off employees, meaning they don't have the money to spend on their own staff and their own business growth, why would they spend money on your business? And those employees that got laid off now have a lot less money, so why would they spend money on your business again? So that's just something to keep in mind. Job growth figures include a lot of part-time jobs and people working second or third jobs. This is not as beneficial to the economy as having strictly full-time jobs for new labour force participants. So another thing to keep in mind when you see these headline employment figures saying unemployment has gone down. Yeah, the headline figure is, but when you delve into the intricate details, just because someone has a job doesn't mean they're doing super well. You could work 5 hours a week and be considered employed in this statistic. So eventually the unemployment rate is going to go up. Now eventually unemployment is going to go up. So higher unemployment drains money away from potentially productive investments and reduces economic output. Less output equals higher inflation, as there are less choices for consumers. So if you've got 3 businesses in town that sell the same thing, they're going to compete on price. Hypothetically, let's say 2 of those businesses go under because the government somewhat funds these businesses, but if they have to start spending more money on unemployment, if they have to start spending more money on welfare as opposed to business innovation, now there's only one business left, and because they're the only one in town, they've got a monopoly, they can raise prices, which further exacerbates inflation. Now, this is a hypothetical example and it's really not too common, but I hope you get the point that less people working means there's less overall goods in the economy, goods and services in the economy, which means you've got less choice, which means those that are in power can jack up their prices. Another thing I'll show is this little Instagram post here. I don't exactly remember what it says off the top of my head at the moment. For context, I'm recording in my car, where my car's parked on my property or my parents' property, there's actually no reception here because we live in the middle of nowhere. But I know I've got something on my Instagram that shows the unemployment figures are actually a little bit worse than headline, but you'll be seeing that on screen now. Yet again, something else that spells doom and gloom for the economy. Okie doke, elected officials are inept. This is going to be a fun little section. So, central banks are hiking rates too late and too slowly. They didn't cull the money supply by raising interest rates earlier, which they should have done. Politicians also don't know what they're doing either. I have countless examples of this, and I'm actually going to go through a few. But essentially, it's too little too late. The Fed can't pull a Volcker shock now. The economy is too over-leveraged and there is too much debt. A crisis is inevitable. So for those of you who don't know, Paul Volcker was the basically head of the Federal Reserve back in the 1980s, and he saved the US economy from hyperinflation. He got a lot of flack for this at the time, and there's some pretty good documentaries, I guess, on what he did. Go search them if you want, but basically he saved the US economy back then by having extremely high interest rates. But unfortunately, they can't really do that now, even though that is one of the only options they have. So here's one example of an elected official being inept. Senator Catherine Cortez Masto, I think that's how you pronounce it. She basically complained to Jerome Powell about gas prices and blamed oil companies for it, and was asking why they aren't protecting consumers. Imagine having a government job and not knowing how private companies work. That's not their role. their role is to make profits for their shareholders. So I don't really know what she was going on about there. Now, I can't actually find the video on YouTube, so I can't download it. It is on this little CNBC website, but I can't be asked to try and find a way to extract that. And for some reason, my screen recording on my laptop doesn't capture audio. So, you know, you can go search this if you want, but basically she was just being an idiot. And it was quite infuriating, to be honest, so maybe don't go looking for that. Now, she was also querying why the Fed wasn't taking into consideration the oil companies manipulating their prices. Now, believe it or not, they're not really price gouging. Okay, maybe there could be a slight amount of it, but basically most of it is not actually price gouging. And for those of you who don't know, price gouging is where a lot of companies will purposely raise their prices just because everyone else is doing it. When I was doing economics in university, I believe that a lot of companies got in trouble when they were like duopolies. So if there's like 2 or 3 companies that run everything, for example, supermarkets here in Australia, there's Coles and Woolworths. If those 2 companies colluded together and started raising all their prices at once, this would land them in trouble from one of the government regulatory authorities, maybe the Australian Consumer something, the ACCC. It's basically illegal for them to do this. So I doubt that most of it is price gouging, otherwise they'd be in hot water already for it. So here's a quote she said: "Unless they stop giving profits and sharing that with their shareholders and start addressing and looking at the consumer who is bearing the brunt at the end of this, these prices are not going to come down. I assume you are looking at this." Companies exist to make a profit, usually for their shareholders. They don't give a shit about consumers' well-being. If I'm a shareholder in a company, I want them to be making a profit. I don't want them to be donating their money to consumers or anything like that. A little bit harsh and dark, but that's how money works. But yeah, she was essentially just having a rant to Jerome Powell about this. Like, is this some like sort of weird therapy session, or is this a meeting about the economy? Like, I don't understand. Okay, so this section is going to be me reacting to some of the very large amount of inept officials. I'm just going to play a clip and then I'm going to chime in whenever I feel like it. But for the most part, you'll be able to tell how stupid they are. And just remember, these guys are in charge of a lot of what goes on in the economy. So, yeah, quite a horror story. Here we've got Senator Elizabeth Warren.
So Americans are struggling with rising costs, and all eyes turn to the Fed. Last week, you announced that the Fed would raise rates by 0.75 percentage point, the biggest increase in nearly 30 years. So let's talk about what the Fed is and isn't doing when it raises interest rates to try to bring down inflation. Let's start with gas prices. The price of gas is up 40% since Russia invaded Ukraine in February. Chair Powell, will gas prices go down as a result of your interest rate increase?
The price of gas was already sort of going up anyway, and although the invasion did make it worse, it's actually come back down. Now, it's only going to go back up later, but it's kind of too early to tell when. Or at the very least, I haven't had the chance to actually look at it, but either way, we'll continue.
I would not think so, no.
Okay. That matters because gas prices are one of the single biggest drivers of inflation. Energy prices overall drove a third of the inflation last month, but the Fed's tools, as you say, have no impact here. So let's look at another necessity, food. Price of groceries is up nearly 12% this year. Americans feel the pinch. No matter how much groceries cost, people still got to eat. Chair Powell, will the Fed's interest rate increases bring food prices down for families?
I wouldn't say so, no.
Okay. So a Fed increase won't bring down these prices. And why? Because rate hikes won't make Vladimir Putin turn his tanks around and leave Ukraine. Rate hikes won't break up monopolies. Rate hikes won't straighten out the supply chain or speed up ships or stop a virus that is still causing lockdowns in some parts of the world. So let's talk about what interest rate increases can do. Chair Powell, you said last week that interest rate increases, quote, moderate demand. Can you just explain a little more about what that means?
Sure. So we think about interest rate increases as affecting financial conditions and then the economy through three broad channels, the first of which is interest-sensitive spending. So that's durable goods and automobiles and things like that. So interest rates go up, people's demand for as a result of higher interest rates will moderate or decline so that supply and demand can get into better balance. The second channel is just asset prices generally. Interest rates, as they go up, will cause asset prices to moderate across the economy, and people spend a little bit less out of their lower level of wealth. The third channel is the exchange rate, which is really just another asset price, and that just basically as the dollar strengthens. As rates go up, the dollar would strengthen, which would tend to drive.
Yep. So as the US economy has their interest rates raised, it increases their dollar, which was basically the crux of my foreign exchange investments lately. I've actually jumped out of a lot of them. While I was on holiday, 2 of them got liquidated, and I lost probably about $1,000 US. Obviously a bit hard to keep track of that stuff when you're overseas, but it's also a combination of just other banks raising their rates and people just being a little bit stupid because they interpreted what Jerome Powell said at his last meeting at the time of recording. I don't know when you're actually watching this, but the last meeting, he sounded quite hawkish to me, but a lot of people thought he was sounding dovish, and they thought that perhaps the Fed was going to start raising rates slower or maybe even start reversing, which is why the stock market had a rally around July-ish, which obviously lowered the value of the US dollar, which fucked up a lot of my foreign exchange investments, but you live and learn.
I appreciate this, and I do appreciate the explanation, but let me just see if I can just put a little more plain vanilla explanation of what's going on here. If I understand what you've said and what economists are saying across the board is that when you raise interest rate, there's going to be less money to invest. And that is, it's going to dampen business investment. Is that a fair statement?
I think the idea is to moderate demand
to invest
so that it can be in better balance with supply. And
so
the current situation, demand is well in excess of supply in some areas of our economy.
More expensive to invest.
Yes, it does make it more expensive to invest. That's kind of the point. If less people are investing, then that slows the rate of inflation. And also higher interest rates means the banks don't lend out as much, which means there's less money being printed into the economy because banks issue credit, which inflates the money supply. The money doesn't actually come from anywhere when you get a loan from the bank. They just type a few buttons and money's just being printed into the system.
Which in turn is going to throw workers out of work. And when they're out of work, they have less money to spend.
Yes, unfortunately, there's going to have to be a lot of unemployment to fix the inflation. But if you let inflation keep going the way it's going, we're going to have a lot of unemployment anyway.
So I get that rate increases stop companies from spending money to build new plants or to buy new trucks or to hire new people. Right, Chair Powell? When money's more expensive, they're less inclined to do that. I think that's what you just said on asset pricing, right?
Well, in the labor market, you have, as you know, you have a situation where there's a shortage of workers, and there are two job vacancies for every person who's actively looking for work.
So I don't exactly know where Jerome Powell's getting this figure of 2 job vacancies for every unemployed person, although it's kind of outdated at the time of this recording. Even back then, I don't know where that was coming from. I remember seeing something that delved into this figure and found out that it wasn't quite true, but I never actually got around to making a Twitter or Instagram post about it because at the time I was rather busy with a bunch of other stuff. So again, another flawed statistic. There are 3 types of lies: Lies, damn lies, and statistics. However, statistics are important, but we'll move on.
Part of this is to get the labor market back into balance.
Well, I appreciate you call it back into balance. What I'm trying to get at, though, is what does the tool of raising rates do? And part of what you just said is that it increases, in effect, the cost to invest, to buy those trucks or new plants or to hire new people. The reason I raise this and the reason I'm so concerned about this is rate increases make it more likely that companies will fire people and slash hours to shrink wage costs.
No shit.
Rate increases also make it more expensive for families to do things like borrow money for a house. And so far, the cost this year of a mortgage has already doubled. Inflation is like an illness, and the medicine needs to be tailored to the specific problem. Otherwise, you could make things a lot worse. And right now, the Fed has no control over the main drivers of rising prices, but the Fed can slow demand by getting a lot of people fired and making families poorer. And while President Biden is working to increase energy supplies and straighten out supply chain kinks and break up monopolies and bring down prices,
no, he's not.
You could actually tip this economy into recession.
Most of us in the economic space already knew this. Just check the timestamp for when I release my recession is coming video.
So I just want to say, you know what's worse than high inflation and low unemployment? It's high inflation and a recession with millions of people out of work.
There's going to be high inflation anyway because money supply. I'm kind of a bit surprised she doesn't know about this. But then again, most of them don't, so with any luck in the future, I'll be able to use videos like this and my Twitter and Instagram posts to show that I kind of at least have a lot better of an understanding about the economy than a lot of people in government positions, so hopefully that'll land me a juicy paying job there. But anyway, that was Senator Elizabeth Warren. Let's go on to Christine Lagarde, head of the European Central Bank.
We expect inflation to remain undesirably high for some time, owing to continued pressure from energy and food prices and pipeline pressures in the pricing chain. Higher inflation pressures are also stemming from the depreciation of the euro exchange rate. But looking further ahead, in the absence of new disruptions, energy costs should stabilize and supply bottlenecks should ease, which together with the ongoing policy normalization should support the return of inflation to our target. The labour market remains strong. Unemployment fell to a historical low of 6.6% in May. Job vacancies across many sectors show that there is a robust demand for labour. Wage growth, also according to forward-looking indicators, has continued to increase gradually over the last few months, but still remains contained overall. Over time, the strengthening of the economy and some catch-up effects should support faster growth in wages. Most measures of longer-term inflation expectations currently stand at around 2%.
Good luck. There is no chance that inflation in the Eurozone is going to be anywhere near 2% for several years yet, at this rate anyway.
Although recent above-target revisions to some indicators warrant continued monitoring.
That one was a little bit harder to react to because it sounded like she was reading off some sheet. But you'll note that she said this should happen. Well, what if it doesn't? So not once did she mention anything about the fact that she could help lower inflation by jacking up interest rates. But I did mention before that they don't really have this option, but what they should have done is they should have done it a lot sooner. So a lot of them have made their bread and now they've got to eat it. So next up, we're going to have Andrew Bailey, the Governor of the Bank of England.
It is, of course, a very challenging situation. We're facing a very big shock to inflation. And unfortunately, in the last 3 months since we last did a forecast in the monetary policy report, that challenge has got much bigger. It's coming from predominantly and overwhelmingly from one source, which is energy pricing, and particularly gas prices, and I'm afraid it is coming from the actions of Russia.
Although in a way it is coming from the actions of Russia, it's actually coming from the sanctions the West imposed on Russia. Now, political debate aside, I'm not saying that Russia shouldn't have been punished for invading Ukraine, but the West should have put a little bit more thought into it before basically shooting themselves in the foot.
Now, our concern is that, of course, we have to bring inflation back down to target from a very high level. Now, other things equal, we think it will come down. The question for us is, are other things going to be equal? And really is about the question of, is inflation going to be persistent and become embedded? Now, we do see risks on that front, and that's why we've acted. And the risks are, and this is where there is a domestic element to the story. We've had a shrinkage in the domestic labour force over the last 2 years or so, during the COVID period. And so when I go around the country talking to firms, as I do a lot, they are still saying to me two things, really. One, we're struggling to hire people. Two, actually we can increase prices. We're not hitting resistance on increasing prices.
For now, eventually the consumers are going to run out of discretionary spending, and then companies aren't going to be able to get away with raising their prices much more.
Now, we understand, obviously, the situation, but it concerns us because that's one way in which inflation can become more embedded. And then we would have to raise interest rates by more than otherwise.
So this is actually a good call from Bailey. He's actually correct here. If they don't tackle this now, companies are going to just keep raising their prices, which means that the central banks are going to have to raise interest rates even more to cull inflation.
So our action today was very, very clearly, we feel we've got to take stronger action, as we said we would, because we changed the language of our sort of, in a sense, forward view back in June to say that if we saw this evidence of persistence, we'd act forcefully, and that's what we've done.
Right, and wage pressures certainly are building. Pay growth is averaging anything between 5% and 6%, depending on how you're looking at it. Do you think the wage pressures would be less pronounced if the Bank of England had tightened faster and sooner?
I don't know who this reporter is, but that's a good question.
Than what you've delivered already?
Well, I think it's important to bear in mind the shocks that we've been subjected to, and in a sense the point at which we can understand what these shocks are, because they're coming from outside. So we don't make policy with hindsight. I will say to people, I think when we were sitting here as we were a year ago, I think if we'd said there's going to be a war in Ukraine, we'd have sort of, really? That is not things that frankly were foreseen, and I think could be foreseen. So I think the debate around, well, if you didn't raise interest rates sooner, wouldn't it have been different? Frankly, is made really by people who think that policy making is done with hindsight, and I'm afraid it isn't.
Well, when you drastically increase the money supply and drastically cut interest rates, of course it's going to lead to inflation, because inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. And if you've raised the amount of money in the economy that much, and you haven't increased output by much, a lot of money chasing a set amount of goods equals higher prices across the board. It's basic supply and demand in a way. If you've got the same amount of goods, but everyone's got a lot more money, all that money chasing fewer goods is going to raise the prices of those goods. There's no new set equilibrium here, unless the new set equilibrium now is much higher prices. So, I mean, yeah, you don't make policy decisions in hindsight, but, I mean, a lot of us in the finance economic space on, like, YouTube, Twitter, etc., could see this coming from a mile away. And central bankers around the world didn't, even though you guys are the ones in charge. So, yeah.
Well, it is tricky. Turning to the short-term interest rate curve, the market assumes that you will go for, let's say, another 150 basis points worth of hikes over the course of this hiking cycle, but then start cutting interest rates. What do you make of the argument that the Bank of England have to hike now in this small window before the economy starts turning south?
This is exactly what a lot of people in the whole finance space have been saying. They need to drastically raise rates right now, and then if they're going to slow it down, do it later. The Maverick of Wall Street talks a lot about this as well. Also, if they're only going to raise it by 100 more basis points, that's still way under inflation, so they need to go a lot further than this.
Well, we take our decisions based on the evidence that we see now. So, it's not a sort of case of us sitting down saying, gosh, if we don't do it now, we're not going to be able to do it in the future. I mean, our decisions are entirely based on what we see today. Now, you're right about the profile of the market. Now, look, we do not, endorse the market curve. We use the market curve as a conditioning tool for our forecast, but it doesn't mean to say we endorse it. So I'm not going to give a commentary on where we think policy is going to go relative to where the market thinks it's going to go. I think it's interesting, as you say, that the market, and it's not just, of course, our curve, actually, you can see it in other curves as well, other countries, thinks that we're sort of going to go up and come down again. And again, without wishing to endorse in any sense, I think the rationale, behind the market thinking that is they think you're going to have to act more aggressively early on, but you may actually have to go above what would be the equilibrium level, if you like, and then come down again to sort of get inflation out of the system. And I can understand why the market thinks that could be the way we go. I'm not endorsing that, but I can understand why. I mean, it's interesting if you go back in time, because I think people would have said, well, that's a policy mistake. And I think the rationale and the thinking in the market now is not so much it's a mistake, but actually it's a path that would deal with expectations, get expectations under control, and then you can bring rates down. Now, we're not endorsing that path, but I think it's an interesting way in which the market has evolved.
And just a question on financial conditions. I noticed today you obviously hiked by 50 basis points, and yet the pound is about half a percentage point weaker. So from that perspective, the interest rate hike hasn't really transmitted through, quote unquote. Does that worry you? Because obviously a cheaper pound means more inflationary pressure.
Well, cheaper pound means more inflationary pressure, which is something I mentioned earlier in the video too.
I think you always have to judge the weight of the short-run reactions in markets against what people were expecting. I mean, market reactions are always against what they were expecting. I think you also should, I always feel it's interesting to look at how they react in what is it, the 2 or 3 hours. But actually, let's see where it is next week and thereafter. So, yes, of course, I follow it closely, but I think we have to be a bit careful about over-interpreting very short-run movements.
Hi, I'm Joanna Bersetchi.
Oh, okay, so that's what her name is.
Governor, tell us why someone who is already facing huge cost of living pressures around energy bills now has to face increases to their borrowing costs on top of that.
It's a very important question. It's probably the most important question, and I realise the distress, because it is a very difficult situation to both have such a large increase in inflation and to be forecasting that there will, I'm afraid, be a recession, and to be saying we have to increase interest rates.
So this is refreshing to see someone in Andrew Bailey's position of power admitting this. We haven't really seen much of this in the last year or so.
And the reason is this: we've had this very big, huge external shock. In the 3 months since we last did a monetary policy report, the change to the whole energy price, particularly gas price regime, has been massive. And I'm afraid that has to be put at the door of Russia. There's no question about that. Now, very reasonable to ask the question, so why are you raising interest rates in that context? Because you can see that, yes, inflation is going to get very high, but other things equal, it ought to come down again, and we do project that, actually. The worry for us is, are other things going to be equal? And the really difficult situation, and this is why I'm afraid we have to do it, is if we have more persistent inflation, that is harder for everybody. We'll have to raise rates by more, and those people, and particularly those on low incomes, will be even more affected, and that's the thing that concerns me.
So is it the case this has got to hurt if it's going to work?
The reason we're doing it is because if we don't get inflation under control, if we don't bring it down from where I'm afraid it's got to go up to because of, say, of this huge energy shock that we're having, if we don't bring it down, then the damage and the distress will be even greater.
110% spot on. So he's got it, but the problem is it's a bit too late for the UK economy. And also, where was this sort of sentiment years ago, not years ago, months and months ago when it was needed the most?
The main pressure is external. Gas prices, everyone understands that. Is it really the case that you need to tighten the screw at home? Is that judgment call? Are you sure about that judgment call?
There's more to inflation than just gas prices, reporter.
You're right that the main pressure is external, and that's going to feed through into inflation, I'm afraid, over this winter. We do think it's going to come down, going through next year and beyond. But we have got another thing going on, which is domestic. The size of the labour force has shrunk. There are fewer people, working in the economy, and that's affecting. When I go around the country, and I spend a lot of time going around the country, the first thing that every firm wants to talk to me about is, I can't hire enough people. And we've got this situation where we're saying, well, I think we can already see the economy slowing. It's going to get worse, I'm afraid. And yet firms are saying two things to me. One is they're still able to increase prices. They're not getting resistance, and they just can't hire enough people. And of course, that does have an upward effect on costs.
And you've talked about wages in the past, somewhat controversially. In the context of these inflation numbers, above 10%, well into next year, is it really reasonable to ask people to accept rises, below 5%?
If everybody tries to get ahead of inflation, then we get inflation more embedded, we'll get more persistent inflation. And that's why I said, particularly, if you seek to beat inflation, we'll get into an upward, trend, and we will have to raise interest rates even more then, and that will be more painful.
Okay. Much noise politically. We have a contest to become Prime Minister. I know you don't want to get directly involved, but there are questions about changing the mandate of the bank and some blame around Liz Truss, certainly her campaign, at the bank's door for this. Is this the time to be addressing the work you do here, or is that risk making a difficult situation even worse? Well,
I'm not going to get involved in the campaign and the leadership election to be leader of the Conservative Party or the next Prime Minister. What I would emphasise is that I think central bank independence is an absolutely key part of the economic system in this country and in other countries. It's an important part, and never more than now. This is the biggest test of our system in a quarter of a century that it's existed for.
Last one, if I may. You talked about a judgment call, walking this path with the consequences on either side of getting it wrong. Have you thought about the consequences if you and your colleagues have got this wrong?
We don't look at it from the point of saying, personally, what if we get it wrong? This is about for the country and for the economy. So we spend a lot of time looking at those risks.
And you're confident you got it right?
We think this is undoubtedly the right thing to do. But we will be back in, about 6 weeks' time, because that's the next Monetary Policy Committee meeting. And we will have to go all through the evidence again. There'll be new evidence, and we will do that all over again.
So that's it for all the reaction parts to our inept leaders. There's countless other examples, but I could do a 5-hour video on that. But I think you get the point. Now, although Andrew Bailey wasn't exactly looking inept here, from what I've seen this time last year, he wasn't acting this way when he should have. So, unfortunately, you can't just reverse some of the bad decisions you've made by making up for it later, especially when you're this important to the overall economy. So the Chinese property market / the Chinese economy in general. Now, as I'm sure you've seen, citizens in China are boycotting their mortgages. They won't pay them back. If this continues, we will see something even worse than the 2008 global financial crisis due to how interconnected the global economy has become. Many economies around the world have bonds connected to the price of real estate in China. And bonds, basically, it's like loaning money to the government. You buy a bond, give the government money, the government pays you back that amount plus interest over time. It's just like how you get a loan from the bank. People usually invest in stocks since they have better percentage returns, but bonds are guaranteed returns. However, bonds don't usually outpace inflation either. but they're better than what the bank would give you. And the bond market is a lot more important than you think. So that little image there is just showing you the returns you get on some bonds. As you can see, it's nothing super impressive. So here's just some information on the bond market if you want to read up on it. You'll see the little highlighted bit down the bottom. A bond market crash is unlikely, but at the time of them writing that article, it did seem unlikely. But they're not writing it in this current economic climate. Now, if you want to know more about what's going on in the Chinese economy, there's quite a few videos on YouTube going around lately talking about it. However, from what I've seen, the CCP has been basically dislike bombing them and getting those videos removed from YouTube. So me even mentioning this small section and having Xi Jinping in the thumbnail is already pretty risky and pushing it. So I won't talk much more about it, but if you want more info, go check out those videos. But all you need to know is the Chinese economy is a little bit fucked at the moment. From what I've seen, the government's basically got a $148 billion bailout on standby for property developers, but it's unsure whether they're actually going to deploy this. They should, from what I've seen, but who knows. And also this may lead to more risky investments in the future if they know they can get bailed out. But that's all I'm going to say on that front. But I am going to basically intertwine that with Australia, where I'm from. Now, Australia in particular is in a lot of trouble. We rely too heavily on China to buy our exports. Now, finding other trade partners is possible, but you'd have exponentially larger transport costs. Obviously, if you look at where Australia is on the map, it's quite a bit away from the rest of the world. And even then, it simply wouldn't be as efficient as China. Now, Australia also has a lot of foreign debt. We could end up in a situation similar to Sri Lanka and Pakistan. So here are some Twitter posts. I think I made them into Instagram posts as well, but there's some Twitter posts on basically this issue with the Australian economy. If you want more info, there's a YouTube channel called In the Interests of the People by Martin North and John Adams. They're like two Australians and they sort of work in the whole economics, finance sort of realm. And they talked about this in one of their videos recently. They're definitely a good watch. Learn a fair bit from them. Even if you're not from Australia, there's some good info in there. So again, if you want more info, go check them out. So we all know by now the sort of issue going on in Sri Lanka, as we've all seen the citizens storming the government's palace and whatnot. But a similar thing is likely to happen in Pakistan. Now, this is just a little Word doc of something that I've turned into an Instagram post now. I may update this slide by the time I get this video ready, or I may not. But basically, here's just some information on why Pakistan is potentially headed into the same situation as Sri Lanka as well. And one other thing I'll mention is, although it's unlikely Australia will end up in the exact same situation as Sri Lanka, we do have a massive foreign debt problem. And no one here seems to really know much about it. They just take our standard of living for granted, but we've basically got a massive international credit card to fund the lifestyles of the Aussies. So now we're on to Russian sanctions. As you all know by now, Russia is one of the most important countries in the world when it comes to commodity resources. Trade with them is currently limited, the main spotlight of course being oil at the moment. At the moment, Russia appears to be the one in power, with them somewhat using oil as a political weapon. Now, at the time of writing, Germany and France in particular have been worried about the lack of heating for their upcoming winters. So obviously this is going to cause a lot of turmoil for those countries in particular. So Russia has actually increased their exports to India and China. Now, these two countries weren't involved in the sanctions. However, the output is not as efficient as it once was, and there's signs of slowing exports. However, it is potentially due to just inflation in general. Now, I've seen a few articles floating around saying outputs are basically the same, but the revenue isn't due to lower prices because Russia has had to lower them to attract those foreign buyers like India and China. But either way, the sanctions haven't hurt Russia as much as they thought have. In fact, they appear to have hurt the West more than they've hurt Russia. So I'm unsure of the source of this graph, but the argument they were making here is that the Russian oil production has barely decreased at all, but this graph is looking at the production of oil, not the sales. However, there will be demand for all this oil in the next several years. So just because they may not be selling this stuff to the West now, in several years when the West needs it, perhaps they'll have lifted the sanctions by then, and Russia will have all this produced oil to send back to the West. And they may have even used oil as more of a political weapon by then, but we'll see how that goes. The point of this graph is, again, I don't know the credibility of it, but the point of it is Russia's basically producing the same amount of oil as they once were, and even if they're not selling it for as high of a price, they're still able to sell it to someone. And even then, it looks like Europe's going to have to cave in and start buying this stuff from Russia again. And now Russia knows that they're the ones in power, so they'll probably jack up the prices, and that's going to make inflation even worse. Regardless of everything I've just said, Russia's commodity output cannot be replaced. It's also very unlikely trade will return to normality anytime soon. So that little Twitter post you're seeing, G sub terms is given to other non-banking institutions in order to label their importance to the world as a whole. Russia is labelled as a G sub of commodities and China is labelled as a G sub of factories. These two are extremely important for a low inflation environment. So yeah, back to the little notes. China is crucial for production and Russia is crucial for natural resources. China has been too focused on zero COVID policy, which is damaging its economy, which also ties into what I said before about the Chinese economy and property market in general. And also, as I mentioned before, when I was reacting to that Andrew Bailey video, the West should punish Russia, but they should have put a bit more thought into it. Also, isn't it funny how China and Russia have had a lot of tensions with the United States? So if these countries got along, maybe the economy as a whole would be doing a little bit better, because I don't think it's a good idea to piss off the G sub of factories, China, or the G sub of commodities, Russia. But that's just an economic point of view. I don't like to get political. So, how do you prepare for this? You can't. Simple as that. There's not a lot you can do. Alright, I'll give you some tips. So, first is to keep stable jobs. I entertained the idea of getting a new job in one of my previous videos, but it was more so just a thought. Deep down, I knew it was a better move to stay put in this economy. In fact, I actually called the recruiter before and turns out the job wasn't going to be much of a fit anyway, so that's fine. At least I tried and I made a new network connection. So just some general advice: live below your means. Like everyone's heard this before. Work extra shifts or / take a second job while they're available, because I don't know how much longer they're going to be available for. Cheaper diet if necessary. If you can somehow substitute foods with same nutritional values, then do that. Or maybe even just start eating less calories overall. Put money in a higher interest savings account. Maybe check around for banks with a higher interest rate, especially because the central banks are raising interest rates, so obviously banks are going to raise their interest rates too. Makes loans more expensive, but makes it more enticing to put your money into the bank, which also helps slow down the economy because you're less likely to spend the money if you know you can get good returns on it by keeping it in a bank. And then don't take out debt you can't afford to repay. Again, this is general advice. It's stuff you've probably heard of before. In fact, I pretty much mentioned most of this in my how to prepare for a recession video, but what changes? It's the same sort of concept. There's There's no magic formula to protect yourself. And it's not like it's going to change. It's basically just money conservation. That's how you prepare for a recession and a financial crisis, is money conservation. So now, as for stocks, I'll be careful what I say here, because in my recession video, I mentioned how agriculture and oil stocks were looking really good at the time, but shortly after I made that video, those tanked. I put a comment on the video saying, go check out my Instagram page for more info on it, because right now it's not a good investment. So whatever I say in this video is probably going to be outdated by the time you watch it. But we should have a pullback in the stock market soon. It's kind of a little bit higher than it should be. So if I were you, I'd hold off on buying for now. Now, as for shorting stocks, which is basically betting that the price of them are going to go down, don't use leverage or you'll get your short position liquidated if the current rally continues. So the current rally in the stock market, although it's unjustified, it may continue for a little bit longer. So if you start betting that the prices are going to go down now, you might lose a lot of money before the market starts to turn around. Remember, the market can stay irrational longer than you can remain solvent. So what that means is the market doesn't make sense for quite a while, and in that quite a while, you lose a lot of money basically waiting for prices to change in the direction you want them to change. And then after you run out of money, that's when the stock market moves in the way it should. Now, at the time, I also don't have any good foreign exchange trades, because it's kind of tricky to see where things are going, especially how the market reacted to the latest Federal Reserve meeting. I just don't understand why. I mean, I kind of get why, but there's no way the rally should have continued for this long. But yeah, I don't have any good foreign exchange trades for you at the moment. I do have long-term stocks in mind, but you'd have to wait for a pullback first. At the current time of recording, Apple is quite overbought, so shorting Apple is a good idea. I've got a short position at the moment. The problem is I opened the short position and then it went up a bit, but I'm going to keep holding on because this little rally in Apple can't last for much longer, and Apple will also get dragged down with the rest of the market, especially considering Apple's weighting in the S&P 500. So that was my video on why we're headed into a financial crisis. The timing is uncertain, but we're clearly headed in that direction. If you just, I guess, paid attention to the video, you'd see that there's a myriad of factors that are pointing towards some economic turmoil, and it's very unlikely that any of these factors are going to change anytime soon. So I hope this video has, raised your awareness of what's going on in the economy at the moment, and hopefully you'll be a bit more conservative with your money and look at even increasing the amount of money you are making by... You look at the time of recording, the only real option is basically getting another job, because yeah, you can make money in the stock market and Forex and shorting crypto and stuff, but it's just too volatile and not guaranteed. Same with starting a business or a side hustle of some sort. Obviously there's a heap of businesses and side hustles, but depending on what it is, chances are that the income earning potential of whatever side hustle you've got going is going to be hampered by this whole economic crisis that we've got coming up. Obviously you can always end up losing your job as well, but losing your job is a lot less likely than not making any money from a side hustle you intend on starting up. Now, I'm not saying don't start one, but don't put too many resources into making it happen. What I mean by that is don't quit your job to try and get something off the ground now. Do it on the side, like what I'm doing. I plan on pumping out a fair few videos in the next coming weeks because although I've got a CPA exam coming up soon, I've done a fair bit of study for it, and it's a bit of an easier subject as well. But it's not like that me creating content for this is hampering my two primary sources of income, which is my two jobs. I'm not calling in sick to any of those jobs, or I'm not staying up super late to pump out a video for me to be really tired and unproductive at work the next day. I'm prioritizing my guaranteed sources of income over a potential maybe source of income down the track, which is really what most of us should be doing in this economic climate. In most climates, but especially this one. So this is just one factor of the game of life. We got to prepare for all these boss battles, jack up your stats, make yourself more valuable to your employer by increasing your defense stat, by increasing how, I guess, productive and important you are to your job, get along with your co-workers and your boss even if they suck, increase your education so that, again, you're less replaceable to your workplace, which again will raise a defense stat, which will keep your money stat intact. We've got a rough boss battle ahead of us, boys. That is all.